The most effective way to control a population is to keep them ignorant. Now, in the old days, when it came to the church, and I'm talking about in the Dark Ages in Europe, the way they control their populations is to keep them ignorant. And when a person is ignorant, then a person doesn't have the ability to think critically or to challenge authority or to understand what their rights are or to make sense of what's going on in the world around them. So that worked perfectly for the church. And if perchance somebody did become a bit too learned and started challenging some of the notions of the church, then they were condemned, right? So if you look at people like Galileo or Newton, these people were condemned by the church during their times. And the reason for this was that there was almost a direct threat to the church and some of the long-held ideas uh, coming from these people, and this could stir up the population and it could diminish the church's control. Anyways, so what they would do was, with people like that, was first and foremost to take their books away. Any source of learning would be snatched away from them, and if that still didn't work, then they would lock those people up in prison. But if you were a woman, it was much worse for you because then any woman who spoke out, who got a bit too above herself through learning, would be condemned as a witch and as and burnt at the stake. So these were some of the practices during the Dark Ages. So fast forward a little forward, come to the colonial era, to modern times. Now, in modern times, they have a far more effective and a powerful strategy in place to keep the population uneducated and dumb. And that is, guess what? The modern education system. The modern education system, let me tell you something about it. It's far more ominous and dangerous than most people think. Because the main objective, if you look back in history, you go back to the late 1800s, the main objective was to train a subservient population to become workers in the factories that were owned by the capitalists. That's why they started their schools. And this schooling system spread throughout the world. So, what we end up producing, rather than people of intelligence, rather than people who have the ability to think, rather than having people who love learning, are people who've just been taught that you need to obey the authority. You need to accept and do things the way that things have been dictated to you. Don't try to find any other way of doing it. Any special talent that you may have is insignificant. You go to school, period one, you do this, period two, period three. And if you don't do these, then you will be without a job and you will starve, etc., and so forth and so on. So this was one of the things to encourage or to instill a sense of compliance that you need to follow the sage on the stage. That teacher is the sage, that teacher is the authority in the classroom, and you need to follow. And if you don't, you're going to be in serious problems. So that's the one thing. The second thing about the modern schooling education is that it's so drab, it's so boring, and it's so irrelevant to the world around us that it gives children the impression that this is what learning entails, that learning itself is boring and drab and doesn't have any link to my personal progress as a human being. It's the only reason I'm ever learning is to pass an exam, and the only reason I'm passing exams is so that I can get entry into the university, and the only reason I can do that is to get a piece of paper. It doesn't have any meaning to me. And this is the view that kids have of this education, and this is dangerous. This is very, very dangerous because it completely removes from them any love for learning, any desire for learning, by giving them the wrong idea of what learning is all about. And here's a story to illustrate that. I was speaking to a parent whose child is doing IT at school at grade 10, 11, and 12 level. And the child absolutely hates the subject. And so the parent says, well, IT is a very drab, boring subject. And I was very surprised at this because I know that IT, technology, coding is a very interesting and very exciting subject, generally speaking. It's what is driving the world's economies these days. Technology is driving the world's economies. Everywhere we look, our world is run by algorithms. And it's really very interesting. And the feedback that I get from nearly every student that studies with us at IT Varsity is that this is really interesting. This is very exciting. Yet this child at school is absolutely hating the subject. Why? I immediately knew the reason for this. The reason is that the way that school approaches the subject of IT is very drab, extremely drab. First and foremost, for those of you who are not in South Africa, the schools in South Africa, the government schools, teach a language called Delphi. Now, Delphi was a language that almost made it in the mid to late 1990s, and somewhere around 2000, it just suddenly went flat because the company that produced Delphi, I think they went bankrupt. Bolland Corporation, they went bankrupt or they were acquired, and Delphi died. And it was instantly overtaken by Java. And Java became the, the, the language of choice, the most popular language in the world for a number of years. And now there's Python as a competitor to Java. But schools in South Africa, 2024, coming on 2025, still teach Delphi. And the way they approach it from such a theoretical perspective that it just becomes the most boring, drab subject. And I taught this subject at school, so I know about it. So, this is the second way that school absolutely destroys education and destroys the love of learning in kids. The third way is this, uh, in which they create a sense um, of subservience. It's this: many of us coming from government schools. I mean, I was in school in the 80s and early 90s. We tend to know so much about World War One, World War Two, the Renaissance, the Roman Empire, the ancient Greek Empire, and that's it. But we have almost no knowledge of what happened in Africa during the past 1,000 years, or the 1,500 years of Islamic rule in the Middle East, or going back even further, the massive influence that India and Indian culture had on nearly half the world at that time. I mean, Indian learning, philosophy, religion, everything just spread across China and pretty much the whole east, and to some extent even some countries in the west of India. How come we know so little or nothing about this? How come we don't know that it was the Indians that invented numbers, or it was the Arabs that invented algorithms, or that Africa, the northern part of Africa, at some stage was some of the wealthiest countries in the world? That Africans, the Moors, who were Africans, ruled Spain for 700 years in a time that was Spain was the wealthiest, most tolerant, most peaceful nation in the world at that time. How come we don't know all of these things? And the answer is simple. Again, the modern education system is being used as a way to control populations. And in this particular case, it's been used to show that European civilization, and that's why we know World War One, World War Two, Renaissance, that European civilization is the best. And the only history worth considering is European history. Leave the history of the brown and black people. That's not important. What's important is the history of the European people. And so this has been instilled in us from the youngest age. And that's why we have this problem today of this ongoing legacy of colonialism, of oppression, of the so-called G7 global, I don't know, global South. Is there global North? But the G7 countries, you know what I mean there. In fact, when you look at South African history, you look at, if you read the books of South African history, for example, Madiba's biography, Long Walk to Freedom, you'll see that the education system was one of the most powerful tools of the Afrikaner government to keep the black population suppressed. In fact, I have a quote here from Vervoet, Hendrik Vervoet, who was the Prime Minister of South Africa at one stage. But at that time, when he made the statement, he was the Minister of Native Affairs. What a terrible, terrible title also for a terrible, terrible man. This is what he said: there is no place for the Bantu in European community above the level of certain forms of labor? What is the use of teaching the Bantu child mathematics when it cannot use it in practice? So Mustafa Foot decided that black people must be kept dumb so that we can control them, and they must only be taught the most simplest thing. They mustn't go into the academic space. They must be taught some kinds of labor like plumbing and bricklaying and building so that they remain our labor force as the white Afrikaner government. Now, this is one of the ways that education is a very, very powerful colonial tool, probably the most powerful, most enduring colonial tool in existence today, because it is this education system that dictates what our universities can and cannot teach. And because it controls the universities, think about it. Go and do your research. All universities need to be, even if you're at a university in an African country or an Arab country or in India, you need to be affiliated with some European or American university just to be regarded as as accredited. And so you are relying on them. Now the universities dictate what the schools must do. And so it creates a cycle all the way from grade R to graduating from university. Our children are controlled in what they are taught, in the way they are supposed to think, in what they are supposed to think, in pretty much every aspect. And so it's no surprise when they come out on the other side as just drones, as just people that are like robots that are designed to do specific menial tasks for the colonial masters. So if we're going to change the world, if we're going to make the world a better place where there's equality, sovereignty, justice, we're going to have to start at grade R, going all the way through university and decolonize our minds and decolonize education.